Working late at Camp Silver Lake always had an eerie feeling, especially on a quiet summer night like July 15th, 2022. I was wrapping up the day's tasks, making sure everything was secure before heading back to the cabin. As I walked along the dimly lit path, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I expected it to be a message from one of the campers or a colleague, but what I saw made my heart skip a beat. The message was from an unknown number, and it read, "Don't stay out too late. The woods aren't safe tonight." I stopped in my tracks, scanning the area around me. The trees stood tall and silent, but the shadows between them seemed to move as if something or someone was watching. I tried to shrug it off, convincing myself it was just a prank, but a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I continued walking, my pace quickening as I neared the main cabin. The thought of the message lingered in my mind, refusing to be dismissed. Who would send such a creepy text, and why? As I reached the cabin door, my phone buzzed again. Another message, just as cryptic. "The lake isn't as calm as it seems. Be careful." My hands trembled as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the cabin was a stark contrast to the cold dread I felt creeping up my spine. I tried to focus on my work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to those messages. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I needed to find out if someone was playing a twisted joke or if there was something more sinister at play. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind outside seemed amplified. I kept checking my phone, expecting another message, but nothing came. As the hours dragged on, I wondered if I was just overreacting or if the danger was real. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. Not if it meant the safety of the campers. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease from the previous night. The sun was shining. The campers were excited for the day's activities, and the eerie messages almost seemed like a bad dream. But as I went about my duties, I couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of dread. It wasn't just the messages. It was the way the woods seemed darker, the air heavier, like something was waiting just out of sight. During lunch, I decided to casually mention the text to my colleague, Mike. He laughed it off, insisting it was probably one of the kids playing a prank. But as I explained the details, the warnings, the strange sense of being watched, his smile faded. "Maybe it's just your imagination," he said. But there was doubt in his voice, and I could tell he was as unsettled as I was. That afternoon, while leading a group hike around the lake, I noticed something odd. The usually calm waters had a strange ripple, as if something was moving beneath the surface. I tried to dismiss it, but the unease grew stronger. As we reached a clearing, my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, my heart racing, and saw another message. "The lake hides more than just fish." I froze, glancing at the lake and then at the campers. They were laughing, oblivious to the tension gnawing at me. I forced a smile, trying to act normal, but my mind was racing. Why were these messages so specific? How did this person know where we were? A chill ran down my spine, and I found myself scanning the woods, searching for any sign of movement. By the time we returned to camp, I was on edge. Every sound, every shadow seemed like a potential threat. I needed to know who was sending these messages and what they meant. But the idea of confronting this unknown presence terrified me. As night fell, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let my guard down. Not until I figured out what was going on. That night, I could barely keep my hands steady as I finished up my work in the office. The camp was quiet, but the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting another message, but the screen remained dark. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could feel it gnawing at my nerves. The words from earlier echoed in my mind. The lake hides more than just fish. Unable to focus, I decided to take a walk around the camp. The cool night air did little to calm my nerves. The only sounds were the distant croaks of frogs and the occasional rustle of leaves. As I approached the lake, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The water was eerily still, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. But beneath that calm surface, I felt a presence. Something that didn't belong. I stopped by the old dock, staring out over the water. The memory of the strange ripples earlier that day came rushing back. My phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. My heart leapt into my throat as I read the new message. The dock isn't safe. Turn back now. My hands trembled, but I couldn't bring myself to move. It was as if something was holding me there, compelling me to stay. I peered down into the water, searching for any sign of movement. The reflection of the moon seemed to waver, as if something was just beneath the surface. A cold dread settled in my chest, but before I could react, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The footsteps continued, moving closer, and I felt a chill that wasn't from the night air. Panicking, I turned to run back to the camp, but the dock creaked ominously beneath my feet. As I stepped onto solid ground, I dared to look back one last time. The lake was as still as ever, but I could have sworn I saw something. A shadow, a figure, moving just beneath the surface. My breath came in short gasps as I rushed back to the safety of the cabins. Whatever was out there, it wasn't finished with me yet. The following morning, I woke up feeling as though I hadn't slept at all. The memories of the night before weighed heavily on my mind, and the sense of dread had only deepened. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that whatever was lurking in the lake was far more dangerous than I had imagined. I knew I had to figure out what was going on before it was too late. Determined to find answers, I decided to explore the history of Camp Silver Lake. I headed to the old storage shed, where we kept some of the camp's records. Dust covered the shelves, and the air smelled of mildew and old paper. As I sifted through the boxes, I found a folder labeled Camp Legends. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing old newspaper clippings and handwritten notes about strange occurrences at the camp. One story stood out, a legend about a spirit that haunted the lake, said to be a protector of the land. The locals believed that the spirit warned those in danger and guided them to safety. But there were also tales of people who ignored the warnings and met with mysterious accidents. My blood ran cold as I realized that the messages I had been receiving could be the spirit trying to communicate with me. As the day went on, I couldn't stop thinking about the legend. It explained the warnings, the eerie presence I felt, and the strange occurrences around the camp. But why was the spirit reaching out to me? And what danger was it trying to protect us from? I needed more information, so I decided to talk to the camp's oldest staff member, Mrs. Fletcher, who had been working there for decades. Mrs. Fletcher was surprised when I mentioned the legend. She hadn't heard anyone speak of it in years. "There's truth to every legend," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of fear and respect. "If the spirit is warning you, then something must be wrong. You need to listen to those messages." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The warnings weren't just pranks. They were real, and whatever danger they hinted at was getting closer. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the spirit and its warnings. I knew I had to take them seriously, but what could I do to protect the camp? The answer came in another message, just before midnight. Tomorrow night, be ready. My heart pounded as I realized the spirit was giving me one final warning. Whatever was coming, it would happen tomorrow, and I had to be prepared. The next day felt like a countdown to something inevitable. Every sound, every movement in the camp seemed amplified, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I spent the day preparing, though I wasn't sure for what. The only thing I knew for certain was that the spirit's final message was clear. Something would happen tonight, and I had to be ready. As night fell, I gathered some supplies: a flashlight, a first aid kit, and my phone. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and the weight of the impending danger pressed down on me. The camp was eerily quiet, and I knew the moment was drawing near. I walked toward the lake, the place where I felt the spirit's presence the strongest. The air was cold, and the water was like glass, reflecting the moonlight. I stood at the edge of the dock, waiting, my heart pounding in my chest. The minutes ticked by, and nothing happened. Just when I started to think I had misinterpreted the message, a thick fog began to roll in from the water, swirling around me. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it, reading the words with trembling hands. "Stay still. It's coming." Suddenly, the water began to churn, and the once calm lake turned violent. Waves crashed against the dock, and something dark and shadowy rose from the depths. My breath caught in my throat as the figure emerged, a tall, menacing silhouette. But just as panic threatened to overtake me, I remembered the spirit's message. I stood still, fighting every instinct to run. The figure paused at the water's edge, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it dissolved back into the lake. The fog lifted, and the water calmed once more. The danger had passed. I realized then that the spirit had saved us. Whatever had been threatening the camp was gone. Relief flooded over me as I turned back toward the cabins, grateful for the spirit's protection. We were safe, at least for now. The cold wind swept through the trees as I began my night shift at Pinewood Camp on October 31st, 2021. The campgrounds were eerily quiet, with only the rustling leaves breaking the silence. It was Halloween, but the usual festive atmosphere was missing. Instead, there was an unsettling stillness that made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I made my rounds, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a routine message from my boss, but what I saw instead made my blood run cold. The message was from an unknown number and simply said, "Look behind you." My heart skipped a beat, and I froze in place, too afraid to turn around. The only sound was the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to glance over my shoulder. There was nothing there, just the dark outline of the trees and the empty campgrounds. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself it was just a prank. But the unease lingered, gnawing at my nerves. I checked my phone again, but the message had disappeared. I was sure I had seen it, but now it was gone, as if it had never existed. I continued my rounds, but the sense of being watched grew stronger. Every shadow seemed to move, and every sound felt amplified. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. My phone buzzed again, and this time I hesitated before looking. The message read, "You shouldn't be here." The words sent a chill down my spine, and I realized with growing dread that this was no ordinary Halloween night. I tried to focus on my duties, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the messages. Who was sending them, and why were they targeting me? The hours dragged on, each one more tense than the last. As the night wore on, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more and more, feeling like a trapped animal in a cage. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. Not yet. The early hours of the morning crept in slowly, each minute dragging as I patrolled the campgrounds. The messages had stopped, but the sense of dread clung to me like a heavy fog. I kept replaying the warnings in my mind. Look behind you, and you shouldn't be here. They echoed in my thoughts, feeding my growing paranoia. I couldn't help but feel that something was watching me from the shadows. As I walked past the old dining hall, I heard a faint noise, a soft tapping, almost like fingers drumming on a table. My heart raced as I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound. The beam of light revealed nothing but empty tables and chairs, covered in a thin layer of dust. The camp had been closed for weeks, and no one was supposed to be here. Yet the tapping continued, slow and rhythmic, coming from somewhere deep within the building. I hesitated at the entrance, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. But something compelled me to move forward, to find the source of the noise. As I stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply, and the air felt thick with tension. The tapping grew louder, leading me to a small back room that was usually locked. Tonight, however, the door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me inside. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open. The room was empty, save for a single table in the center. On it lay a dusty old radio, the source of the tapping. It was an old, battered device that hadn't been used in years. Yet, as I stared at it, the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, static hum. I moved closer, my breath catching in my throat as the static began to form words. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice crackled through the radio, distorted and barely audible. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice continued, but the words were garbled, lost in the static. Panic surged through me as I realized that whatever was sending these messages wasn't human. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I fled the dining hall, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The campgrounds were silent, but the eerie feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I knew I had to leave, but something was keeping me there, some unseen force pulling me deeper into the mystery. The night was far from over, and I could feel the presence growing closer, waiting for the right moment to strike. The darkness outside seemed to press in on me as I hurried away from the dining hall. My mind raced with questions, but no answers came. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my boots. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me. The camp felt like a maze, every familiar path now a potential trap. I headed toward the main office, hoping to find some clue or a way to contact help. The building was old, with creaky wooden floors that groaned under my weight. As I approached, my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but curiosity and fear compelled me. The message was simple: stop searching. It knows. The words sent a shiver down my spine, and I hesitated at the door, unsure if I should even go inside. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The office was dark, the only light coming from the glow of my phone. I felt a surge of panic as I realized the landline was dead, the screen of the office computer a blank void. There was no way to reach anyone. I was completely cut off. As I stood there, trying to figure out what to do next, a strange sound filled the room. A low, droning hum, almost like a chant. I followed the sound to the back of the office, where a stack of old files and papers was scattered across the floor. The hum grew louder as I neared, and I could feel the vibration in the air. My heart pounded as I reached out, pulling back the top file to reveal a dusty, yellow document. The title read, Incident Report, 1995, and beneath it, scrawled in a shaky hand, were the words, "Do not open." Ignoring the warning, I flipped through the pages. The report detailed a series of strange events at the camp, including disappearances and unexplained phenomena. My breath caught in my throat as I read the final entry. The entity is growing stronger. It feeds on fear. We must stop it before it's too late. The page was stained with what looked like dried blood. The humming grew deafening, and I felt a cold, clammy hand brush against my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced down to see another message. It's too late. My heart raced as I realized the truth. Whatever this entity was, it was already here, and it was coming for me. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, reaching out for me. I had to leave, but as I turned to run, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I was trapped. Panic surged through me as I yanked on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The room seemed to close in around me, the darkness growing thicker, almost tangible. My breathing was ragged, and I could feel my pulse racing in my temples. The low humming persisted, vibrating through the walls and floor, making it hard to think clearly. I knew I was running out of time. Desperation took over as I searched for another way out. The windows were small and barred, offering no escape. My eyes darted around the room, and I noticed a trapdoor in the corner, half hidden beneath a rug. Without thinking, I rushed over and pulled it open. A gust of cold, musty air hit me as I peered down into the darkness below. The humming was louder here, almost as if it was coming from beneath the ground. I hesitated only for a moment before climbing down the narrow ladder into the darkness. The wooden rungs creaked under my weight, and I had to fight the urge to turn back. The air was thick with dust and the scent of damp earth. When my feet touched the ground, I found myself in a small, dirt-floored cellar. The only light came from the faint glow of my phone, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I explored the cellar, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the room was a circle of strange symbols, drawn in what looked like chalk. At the center of the circle lay a small, old-fashioned radio, similar to the one I had found in the dining hall. It was the source of the humming. The symbols around it pulsed with a faint, unnatural light, and I could feel a sinister energy emanating from it. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, the static filling the cellar with a disorienting noise. A voice emerged from the chaos, distorted and hollow. "You cannot escape. It is everywhere." The words sent a jolt of terror through me. I knew I had to destroy the radio, but as I reached out to grab it, the humming intensified, and the ground beneath me began to shake. The cellar felt alive, and I realized with dawning horror that the entity was using the radio as a conduit to manifest itself. I had no choice. With all the strength I could muster, I smashed the radio against the ground. The cymbals flared brightly before fading into darkness, and the humming ceased abruptly. The shaking stopped, and the cellar fell silent. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I felt a cold breeze brush past me, carrying with it a whisper. "This is not the end." I knew then that I hadn't defeated the entity. I had only angered it. The silence in the cellar was suffocating, broken only by the faint echo of the entity's final whisper. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I had only bought myself a little time. The darkness around me seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a reminder that the entity was still out there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I knew I couldn't stay in the cellar, but the thought of what awaited me above filled me with dread. I climbed back up the ladder, every creak of the wood echoing in the stillness. When I emerged into the office, the air felt different, heavier, almost oppressive. The door that had trapped me earlier was now slightly ajar, as if inviting me to step outside. My instincts screamed at me to run, to leave the camp and never look back. But I knew I had to see this through. The entity's threat hung over me like a dark cloud, and I needed answers. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the campgrounds were eerily quiet. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting everything in a shadowy gloom. I felt a cold breeze brush against my skin, and for a moment, I thought I heard the faint sound of someone whispering my name. I turned, expecting to see something in the darkness, but there was nothing. The camp was empty, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I made my way back to the lake, the place where this nightmare had started. The water was still, reflecting the darkness above. As I stood there, staring at the surface, my phone buzzed one last time. My hand shook as I pulled it out and read the message. "It's time." A chill ran down my spine, and I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. The entity was here, and it wasn't going to let me leave so easily. The water began to ripple, and I saw a dark shape rising from the depths. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the thing emerging from the lake. It was tall, shadowy, and formless, yet I could feel its malevolent presence. The air around me grew colder, and I knew there was no escaping it this time. The entity had waited long enough, and now it was claiming what it wanted. But just as the darkness closed in around me, the figure paused, as if reconsidering. The air grew still, and the entity slowly receded back into the lake, leaving only the rippling water behind. I was left standing on the shore, shaken and confused. The entity was gone, but I knew it wasn't defeated. The final message on my phone was a stark reminder: "You will never be safe." The camp was quiet again, but I knew the entity was still out there, waiting for its next chance to strike.